for joining. And had the idea of this Sitecore user group is that it's that it's for you, the Sitecore community, and for anyone within Southeast Asia or outside that. But everyone working with Sitecore, work as a developer, marketer, user, anyone that is interested in Sitecore. Although this session will be focused on developers, technical people. But yeah, so the idea is that this is for you. So this time from Sitecore, we are organizing it at this point, but hopefully we can get some folks in the community, involved as well. So if anyone wants to do a presentation in future or share anything like we are doing now, just reach out to me, and hopefully we can make this a more collaborative format, and that we can do on a regular basis. But at least at this time, it was good point, a good time to organize a meeting and a user group meetup to show off the exciting new features in Sitecore 10. So for today we have. We first kick off with Rob, who joined from Australia. He will be talking about how Sitecore 10 can support Kubernetes and containers. So there's a lot of exciting stuff there, and later after that I will show what are the new features, the other new features within Sitecore 10. More specifically, what changed on for you as a developer, especially with ASP.NET Core support, rendering host, etc. And after that, we will conclude with Gurlin, and he will present about the new version of Sitecore Experience Commerce, version 10. And also the new release for Content Hub as well. There's a lot of new exciting stuff as well. So without further ado, I want to give the word to Rob.
Cheers, Tom. Okay, let's see if I can share my desktop. I'll turn my camera off while I'm presenting. There's the button gone. Number 1. Hopefully you can see a slide.
Yeah, can. Thank you.
Woohoo! Okay, yeah. So as Tom said, I'm going to talk a little bit today about Sitecore on Azure Kubernetes Service, commonly known as AKS. My name is Rob Earlam. I'm a technical evangelist with Sitecore, based down in Melbourne. Been working with Sitecore products for about 15 years now, give or take. And you can find various ways to get hold of me on the screen there, so feel free to get in touch after this if you like. So before we dive into Sitecore and AKS, I just want to touch a little bit about Kubernetes and what that is. If you go to the Kubernetes site, you can see the link here. This is the official explanation on the official documentation site for Kubernetes. It was originally created by Google back in 2014. Well, that was when they open sourced it. And you may see the name abbreviated, like in the title here, to K8S. And that comes from the fact there's 8 characters in between the K and the S, in case you're wondering. Now, this explanation is okay, but it's a pretty abstract way of describing what it does. So why do we need it? Well, containers are a really good way to bundle and run your applications. But in production, you need to manage them, and you need to ensure that there's no downtime when those containers are running. For example, if a container needs to be stopped and started again, or if something goes wrong with it and it dies, Kubernetes is there to provide you the framework to run those containers in a reliable and predictable way. And it does that through a few key feature areas. It allows you to expose containers using either DNS names or via IP. And if traffic to one container is high, Kubernetes will let you load balance and distribute that traffic across different containers within the Kubernetes cluster. It allows you to basically manage your storage, how you choose to do it. You can either store it locally inside of the cluster, or you can hook into external cloud providers like Azure Blob Storage and the like. It also allows you to basically work with the concept of current and desired state. And what that means is current state is how the containers are operating in your system at the moment. And a desired state is a set of configurations that you pass over to Kubernetes. And then Kubernetes will make its best attempt to make your current state match the desired state you've passed in. And this is basically how you handle your deployments. One of the cool things about it is self-healing. It's not quite self-aware, but self-healing. It'll restart containers that fail. It'll replace containers. Any containers that don't respond to health checks that you define, Kubernetes will kill those containers and recreate them in the hopes of creating a healthy container in its place. And it also won't advertise containers as being available for traffic until they are actually ready to serve it. And if in the Sitecore scenario here, you can think of like the startup time for your CD, Kubernetes will hold a container back until it's warmed and ready to receive traffic. So you don't end up with connections pooling while they're waiting for the CD instance to actually become live. It also has inbuilt secret and configuration management. So you can store sensitive information such as passwords, OAuth tokens, SSH keys, and you can deploy and basically push out all of these as you're building your container images, which means you don't have to bake them directly into there. So with Sitecore, again, you think of things like connection string data, certificate data, license information, things like that you don't really want to bake into your actual images themselves. So what are some of the key concepts around Kubernetes? Well, we have a cluster first. That is basically the foundation of a Kubernetes setup. All of your different objects that are represented in Kubernetes will run on top of this cluster. And the cluster will basically have a series of nodes, which it uses to create your containers. Nodes are basically a compute set, so commonly a VM, that's what you'll most likely see them created as. And those are basically where your containers will actually run. You have the concept of a pod, and a pod is the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes. And it's basically a group of one or more containers which share storage and network resources, which control how they actually run. You have a deployment, and this basically specifies a desired state, which I kind of just touched on briefly before. So you push this desired state, this deployment, to your cluster, and Kubernetes will then modify the actual state in your nodes to match the desired state that you've just specified. Container, we're not going to go into too much details about what containers are today. There's heaps of content out there already today, but it's basically a way of encapsulating an area of your application, one piece of your microservices architecture, and it allows Kubernetes to create and destroy and basically roll out multiple versions of the same application. A service is what's used to expose a running set of pods to other containers within Kubernetes and also to the outside world, if you like. So this allows your containers to communicate with them, and you can also configure more advanced networking concepts like load balancing. And ingress basically sits in between your internal pods and containers and the outside world altogether. So this is usually a reverse proxy like Nginx, which we'll take a look at shortly. And this basically routes and maps host requests or requests coming in on host names into the specific services and containers that need to receive those traffic. Again, going back to a Sitecore example, if you come into the ingress requesting the CD URL, then that traffic will be directed to the CD pod and the CD container. If you request the identity server URL, that traffic will go through to your identity server pod, your identity server containers. The last thing is the concept of a namespace. And this is basically a way for you to group resources within your cluster. I like to think of a namespace as kind of similar to a resource group in Azure, in that it's a way for you to manage and group items that have a similar life cycle is kind of how I like to view it. And it means you can basically, group them all together so everything's logically contained. So that's Kubernetes in general, but what is AKS? Well, AKS is Microsoft's managed Kubernetes service. So it's all the fun stuff you get with Kubernetes, but it's kind of Kubernetes with guardrails on, if you kind of like to think of that, because Kubernetes is a complex topic. There are people who make entire careers out of just single elements of Kubernetes. There are security Kubernetes experts. There are people who focused their entire careers on it. So Microsoft's created this managed version, which takes away some of the pain for you. And that's through things like elastic provisioning. So you basically, if you suffer spikes in traffic, you can ramp up the amount of resources available to your AKS cluster to be able to handle those spikes automatically without you having to do things yourself. It's got a really nice integration with VS Code, so you can see everything that's running directly from within your IDE. It's got advanced identity management through Azure AD. So if you're already using Azure Active Directory to manage your different resources in Azure, then this fits in really nicely with it. It'll go really well alongside. It's available across the globe, 36 different regions. I'm not sure how many regions they have in total now, but that's a good percentage of them that it's available in, and the number's only increasing. And it supports both Linux and Windows nodes, which is important for Sitecore because we only run on Windows containers. So yeah, that brings us to Sitecore on AKS. What's available today? Well, you can go to dev.sitecore.net and you can download a full set of Kubernetes specifications for version 10. You can get a complete installation guide, and that will basically walk you through standing up an AKS instance and deploying out an out-of-the-box Sitecore instance into a running AKS instance. It's really nice and it's quite easy to do. Well, the first time might take a little bit of getting used to, but once you've done it once, it's pretty easy. I do want to touch on what is and isn't supported currently. In production today, we will support all application containers. So your CD, your CM, identity server, the different XP roles. Where things get a little trickier is the data storage containers. We do issue some data storage images, which are available to be used in non-production if you want to do that to keep your deployment pipelines simple. But we won't support those in production. We're not ready to support those yet. So you need to plan how you're going to manage your data storage in prod. This could be standing up Azure SQL databases, using PaaS infrastructure to handle that. You could create your own SQL databases and use those if you like. Microsoft has supported SQL Server container images for you to use. The thing that we have to be key about here is you have to run them in a separate node pool from your application containers, which kind of makes sense anyway. Like, as I said, all the nodes are backed by VMs in Azure, and Microsoft has different VMs for different workloads. Your workload for an application image is going to be quite different as the workload for a database image. So it makes sense to have a different scaled VM backing that. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a deployment shortly, and we're going to cross my fingers and hope the demo gods are playing nicely. But let's take a look at what we're going to actually deploy. I have ahead of time set it up an AKS instance in Azure. Some of these things can take maybe like 10 to 15 minutes to provision a new AKS instance, which, I mean, if you compare to standing up on-prem infrastructure, is no time at all, but it's not very entertaining for a user group session. So we have an AKS instance that's already existing. We have actually 2 Windows nodes, which are going to be provisioned in there. And we have an Nginx reverse proxy. As I just mentioned, this is going to control all the traffic that comes into our AKS cluster, and it's going to direct it to the correct areas that traffic needs to go to. And then we're going to deploy out a really simple XM topology. So we're going to have a CM instance, a CD instance, an identity server instance, and that's going to be backed by Redis, Solr, and SQL, all stored in AKS or running inside container images. If you look at the kind of color scheme here, what you have here is the actual logos represent individual containers themselves. The blue boxes represent a pod. So, and the dashed purple ones kind of represent a service. So if you take a look at the CM on its own, for example, here we have a single pod with a single container stored in it, and that's wrapped around with a service that allows the CM instance to communicate with the other containers and the other containers to communicate with it. So this is all, again, pretty abstract. I think it's probably time we actually start to take a look at this. So as I said, I've created an AKS instance ahead of time. So I'm just going to load this up in the Azure portal. And we've got this user group here for SUG SEA, and there's a couple of resources in here. First of all, we have a container registry. So if I was working as a developer locally, I'd be working on my implementation, creating all of my customizations. I'd then be building my own container images. And the best way to host those to run with AKS is to host them in an Azure container registry, which is what this fellow at the bottom is here. You'd push your containers into there, and then AKS would pull those images out. And what you really want to do is co-locate your container registry and your AKS instance as closely as possible, because you want to minimize the latency for the pull of those images, because they can be quite large in size. And above that, you can see we have a Kubernetes service, which is AKS. This is what AKS looks like in the portal. It looks pretty simple, but when you create that, you'll get a single line in your resource group here. What it will also do is it will create an entirely separate resource group, which basically stores all of the different Azure elements that underpin that AKS instance. So for example, we can see I have this is a one virtual machine scale set, a set of virtual machines. These are the Linux-based ones. You need at least one Linux node to run your main cluster, because it's run on a Linux image. So you need at least one of those. You can't just run on Windows images alone. The next virtual machine scale set here is my Windows images. So Sitecore runs on Windows images. So we need a set of VMs to be able to deploy those to. And then we also have other things which are pretty common in Azure. Things like network security group to control access. We have public IP addresses, which control how our external traffic will come and enter into our Kubernetes cluster. And when you're looking here, it kind of makes sense how you start to see how the different Kubernetes concepts map down into Azure resources that have kind of existed for a while. It's kind of a nice way to marry them together. So that's pretty awesome. We have an AKS instance there, but it's not much use if we don't deploy something to it. So let's take a look in VS Code. What I've done here is I've downloaded the out-of-the-box Kubernetes specifications that you can get for V10. So let's start to take a look at what's in here. Let's start off with the secrets. I mentioned before that Kubernetes has really nice secret management, and it all just works on the concept of these text documents. You go in and you basically just populate the admin password as B, obviously it's always B, and then you go through and you put your core database password in and your database username and various things. You can scroll down, there's some interesting ones, are things like the Sitecore license needs to be encoded, so you need to encode that down so it can be passed in as an environment variable. And then you basically have this customization.yaml, which references all of those. So what you can do when you're in your specifications, you can basically say, right, I want to access a secret in the Sitecore admin group. These like groups them together, and it's the secret that's stored in this file. Same with the database. When you're building your connection strings, you'd say, I want the secret that's in the Sitecore database group, and I want the EXM master database password, for example. So the next thing I want to look at is these external specifications. As I mentioned, we have a series of data storage container images. These are available for non-production use. So these are things like SQL, Redis, and Solr. And if we look in here, we can see what a Kubernetes specification looks like. And we've got a couple of elements in here. First of all, we have a service. So this is what's going to expose the deployment for me. So we have a service, its name is SQL. And then below that, we have the actual deployment itself, how this is going to be created in my cluster. So I define the deployment, I assign some labels to it. And then what we're going to say is I want one pod. So I want one pod of this. And each of those pods will contain all of the containers listed below this node here. So I have a single container. It's pulling in the SQL Server image from our public Sitecore repository. And you can see here we start to pass in the secrets. So I'm using the SA password environment variable, and I'm going to pass that in from the Sitecore database secrets collection. And it's the one that's stored in the Sitecore database password.txt. If we take a look at Redis, it's very similar. Again, we specify a service for Redis, exposing it to the other containers in the architecture. Then we have our deployment. We have a single Redis pod, and that will contain a single container, again, stored using the Redis image from our public repository. Solr, again, very similar. This is all going to get a bit repetitive for a minute. We specify our service. Again, we have our deployment. one instance of Solar, and it's just deploying our image out. If you wanted to load balance Solar, you wanted multiple instances, so you had an index-heavy site, you could just change your replica count to 2. That's all you have to do, and then you get 2 pods instead of 1. Okay, so after you've installed these database images, we have these init images. And these are basically initialization ones, which are there to set up the database and Solar containers ready for use. The SQL one will initialize the items in the database for XM, make sure that's all ready to run. And the Solar one will basically run and create all of the index definitions inside of the container. So they're all ready to be populated with data. And then we get to some interesting ones, actual application instances. So here we go, we have a CD instance. So once more, we have our service. It's called CD. We're exposing port 80. So we're saying it will accept traffic on port 80 into this service. And then we declare our deployment for our CD instance. I've changed this to 2 replica sets. I've load balanced my CD instance. We point it to the image. And again, we populate heaps and heaps of environment variables to these. The interesting ones with these ones are these liveness and startup probes. So this is a concept of liveness and readiness that Kubernetes has. And it's how Kubernetes knows when a pod is active and when a pod is ready to receive traffic. So we have these paths now in Sitecore. You can go and hit this yourself. And basically, Kubernetes will hit it on a kind of like almost like a ping test. And if it gets a 200 response from the live endpoint, then it knows that the container's awake. It's ready. It's awake and it's just live. It also has the readiness test, which is it ready to receive traffic. So it will hit both of these. Once the ready endpoint returns 200, then it knows that it's ready to receive traffic, and it'll start opening that container up to receive traffic through. The last thing to look at on here is the ingress. So this is how we define the ingress for this application, well, for this architecture. And basically what we're doing here is we're mapping host names to services. So I have these host names for cd.globalhost is my content delivery, cm.globalhost is content management, ID is identity server. And what we're basically saying here is if anything comes in, any traffic comes into my ingress on the host header cd.globalhost, send it to my CD service on port 80. And remember from the spec before, our CD service on port 80 was mapped to the CD deployment. So that's how it routes the traffic through to the correct location within AKS. Similarly with CM, cm.globalhost goes to my CM service. ID.globalhost goes to my ID. And then at the bottom, we work with some secret data, just basically to apply the TLS certificates, handling HTTPS to secure the traffic. Okay, again, still more theory. Let's start to take a look at some of this in action. So I've got a running AKS instance. I'm going to use some PowerShell here, and I'm going to paste in the long commands because my typing gets awful on demos. This command here will basically run an Azure AKS get credentials. I pointed it to my resource group and the AKS instance I created. What this does is it basically gets an authentication token from Azure, and it will persist it to this .q config file inside my user directory. And that's what we're going to use very shortly to authenticate with the Kubernetes dashboard. Another command I'll paste in, so you use az AKS browse, again, the resource group and the AKS name itself. And what this is going to do is it's going to create an AKS dashboard, or a Kubernetes dashboard, sorry, that is running basically tied to this PowerShell window. And it's going to be available in my browser here. So this brings you up, you get the authentication window, and here's where we're going to select that kubeconfig file. We can go into here. This is just my user directory, my standard user directory on my machine. You have this .cube folder. We select the config file and we sign in. And this is Kubernetes. This is the out-of-the-box Kubernetes dashboard that you will see for interacting with any Kubernetes instances out there, whether it's AKS, on AWS, on just on-prem created. This is a standard Kubernetes dashboard. And you can see loads of interesting information. We can go and view the different nodes. Remember I said we had one Linux node down here. So we can see that's the bottom one that's running my actual cluster information. And then I have my 2 Windows nodes. I think if you expand this, there's lots of labels applied to these. I think somewhere there should be one that says what image type it is. So we have a Windows build and things like this. We can go through and view the overview here. And here's where you see your different namespaces. So this is where we group different assets. I'm just going to work in the default namespace for this example. And again, I've kind of deployed some things ahead of time. I've already pushed all of the secrets into here. And you can still go and view the data, though. I can go and view my admin secret, and I can see that it's B again. And we can see there's not too much going on here. So I think it's about time I started to do some deployments. So I'm running in my specs folder here, and I'm going to use kube control. Again, I'm going to apologize in advance for all my awful typing. And we're going to run an apply command. I'm going to say I want to run some specifications that are stored in files. So I'm going to use the file switch. And we're going to start off with the external specs, so the data storage ones. So this is going to go away, and you can see it's created my service for SQL and my deployment for SQL. My service for Redis, deployment for Redis, service for Solar, and deployment for Solar. And if we flip back to the dashboard, you can see we get these nice pie graphs now showing that some of my deployments have gone through okay, and they're all green now. I already ran this ahead of time earlier, so I basically installed these and then deleted them again, which means that these are really quick to set up now because the images are already downloaded to my AKS cluster. The first time you run them, it's going to take a bit longer because it's got to actually pull down those images as well. Okay, so we've got those running. Next up, we need to run the init tasks to initialize those databases. So those are in the init directory. Okay. And these are slightly different containers. These get run as what are called jobs. And jobs are basically containers that they get created, they stand up, they execute, and then they disappear again. So they're just like one-off tasks that get created. And you can see they're green now, which is okay, but then they should hopefully in a second change to dark green. And what that means is that the job has actually finished its completion. Just them just being green at the minute means that they're actually still executing. And there we go, dark green, awesome. Things are looking good. So the last thing we need to do is actually install the application elements. So again, I'm just in the root specs folder I was just looking at before. So we can just run apply with 2 Ps. And we're going to use just the files and just all the ones in the root of the folder I'm in. And here we go. It's created the CD service and the CD deployment. It's created the CM service, CM deployment, identity service, and identity service deployment. So we can go into here now and we can start to see these deployments come up. And this is where you start to see the difference between liveness and readiness. So the deployments are green because these containers I just created are live, but the pods themselves are still yellow because they're not ready. And what that means is that we're just waiting for Sitecore to start up. It still takes a little bit of time for Sitecore containers to warm up initially out of the gate. So we're just waiting for them to do their initial processing before Kubernetes will let them receive traffic. But you don't have to use the CLI. You can also interact with Kubernetes directly from this. Sorry, you don't have to use the dashboard. You can interact with it from the CLI as well. So if we wanted to check the status of those pods, we could do kube control get pods. Scroll that back up so I can see in the background. And here we go. We can see all the pods that were created. And here we can see we're basically saying we have 2 CD pods because we specified the replica set to be there twice. I wanted to load balance those. And you can see each one has 0 of 1 containers ready, which basically means that it's trying to get 1 container ready, but it's still not there yet. There's still only one that's actually, sorry, there's none actually available yet. We can check again. I think one of them just changed. Okay, so we can see we have 1 CD up. We have 1 CM up now. We're still waiting for one of our CD ones to come up. You can also get more detailed information on these. So let's say I wanted to get a bit more information on that one. It looks like it's finished now. But while that was starting up, you can do kube control describe instead of get. So describe pod, drop the name in. And that'll give you heaps of information at the start. I'll go back up to the top. So things like the namespace, when it was created, the labels. This is mostly just around what was defined. The really interesting part is probably the events at the bottom. So this is what actually happened in Kubernetes when it created it. So it started off by scheduling this for creation. It pulled down the image. It said it was already present on the machine, so it's already available there. It created the container, and then it started the container. So the last thing I need to do is I need to hit these with my host header. But obviously, cd.globalhost is not a real URL, so I need to map that into my host file. So I need to get the public IP for these. So what you could do for that is, if we go to kube control again, that's typical command you use for interacting with your cluster. This time, though, we're going to get our ingress. Remember, that was the key part which mapped our hosts into our public IP. And here's what we can see, our different hosts here, cm.globalhost, ide globalhost, cd globalhost. And the key here is the address. This is our public IP address available to the world. So we can copy this. I can jump back into VS Code, not Visual Studio. And if I open my host file, I think they're already in there. Yeah, let's just double check that hasn't changed. Nope. So I have my 3 host headers in there. That's good. Visual Studio can go away. So let's see if we can hit cm.globalhost/Sitecore. And if all's worked well, that should kick me off to my identity server. Awesome, here we go. I can log in, get one password out of the way. And here we have a running XN dashboard. Sitecore running in AKS, and it's pretty quick to install. I can go and hit my cd.globalhost. And notice, because we're using TLS and certificates I trusted on my machine, all this is running via trusted certificates. And we hit our CD. So the last thing I want to show you is the concept of resiliency. I mentioned before that Kubernetes will automatically basically recreate containers if they die, if they become problematic. And it's really easy just to kind of show that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do Kubernetes get pods again. So our CD instance is load balanced here. We have 2 instances of them. What I can do is I can just go into here and I can go kube control, delete pod, put the iname in, and then that'll basically get rid of that Kubernetes pod altogether. If we jump to the dashboard quickly, we should see, here we go, my deployment's yellow now. It knows something's wrong because only one of my pods exists. We can see it's been created, but it's warming up. That's why it's yellow, so it's not ready to receive traffic. But if I go to my CD, it's still running because the other existing pod is there, it's live, it's ready, it's receiving traffic. So you can see the load balancer's kicked in, it's forwarding all traffic to the correct pod. Once this one comes online eventually, then it'll then start to balance the traffic out between the 2 different pods equally through the load balancer. Okay, let's hop back to slides briefly. I just want to finish on a couple of closing thoughts. As I said, Kubernetes has been open source since 2014, I think I said. There's heaps of industry standard Kubernetes tooling out there. Like, it's a huge industry. Just make sure you're leveraging that. It can make your life a lot easier, just in your day-to-day work with Kubernetes and AKS in general. Make sure to use Kubernetes secrets, secure your applications. Don't bake your secrets directly into your images. Otherwise, when your license file expires, you're going to have to create a new image with a new license file, and it's a pain. I said, be careful of white space there, because this has bitten me a few times now. Those text documents with the secrets in, if you have like a space at the end of one of the values, or if you have a carriage return in there, that'll get persisted into Kubernetes, and you'll scratch your head for an hour or 2 figuring out why it doesn't work when it says it's exactly the same. So definitely be careful of white space. Make sure you secure your cluster. This is the same as any production infrastructure. Security in Kubernetes is a complex topic. There's heaps of information out there. Microsoft's got some really good information, but make sure you spend the time to do that. As I said before, you've got to plan how you're going to set up your data storage roles in production as well. So SQL, Solr, Redis, you can't use the images we provide for them. You can store those in AKS as well if you like, but they need to be in a separate node pool, or you can use, for example, like a PaaS offering, or you could even stand up your own IaaS infrastructure for those if you're comfortable doing that. And lastly, read Microsoft's AKS best practices. Microsoft have heaps of really, really good documentation on this. They're there to help you out. Definitely make the most of it. Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, we do have some questions in the chat. Oh.
Oh, so we do. Okay.
Do you want me to read them out?
I've got them here. That's okay. I can do it. So, where and how can I update SSL, TLS, private certs configurations, CM, CD, okay. So they're actually stored in. Where did I have Kubernetes? Other way. There we go. They're all stored in secrets, or your TLS data is. So, for example, I have my CM TLS is stored in a secret in here. If I go to my specs again, we have basically what we've done here for local development is we're generating a locally trusted certificate, which is then encoded and pushed out as a secret. In a production environment, you obviously wouldn't do that. You'd need a legitimate certificate to be able to secure your traffic. Whether you do that by buying a certificate, or there's a really nice integration between Kubernetes and Let's Encrypt. So you can basically run Let's Encrypt directly on your Kubernetes cluster, and it will automatically generate SSL certs for any instances that you have there on the correct host names, store them all in the secrets, and update them as they expire. It's amazing. Like, it's really nice. What size were the VMs in your notebook? So I put slightly bigger VMs in because I wanted it to run quickly for my demo. I think they were DSV8. I have a. Where's my PowerShell gone that I used to create these? Let's see. Okay. What did I create? DAS, that's what it was. So I think they're like 32 gigs of RAM, 2 of them. Yeah, so pretty meaty. Yeah, so VMs. Oh, there's more coming through. Okay. Will there be a recommended cluster sizing? Yeah, so we're working on a performance white paper. We get this question all the time around basically how it performs compared to PaaS, how it performs compared to IaaS, the cost implications around that. As with any of these performance type things, it's not a straight answer. It's always pretty complicated. We're going to have a white paper that comes out which kind of goes through comparing our internal site we use for testing to previous versions and throughput changes. Yeah, it's on the way. I'm not sure when it's going to be delivered, but it will arrive. Okay, any final questions before I pass this over? I think we're good. Thanks for listening.
All right, thank you so much. It was a very interesting talk. All right, so let me take over the screen. All right, so yeah, so next up I'm gonna talk about the other new features within Sitecore 10. So of course the biggest change, especially for developers and anyone working with infrastructure, maybe containers is the most exciting new change that we introduced with Sitecore 10. But of course, there's also a lot of other things that have changed, and also especially for developers. So yeah, let me go through that and show you some of the new things that have been delivered as part of Sitecore 10. So let me first of all go through the users, the new features within Sitecore itself. So within for content authors, for marketers. So in Sitecore 9 we introduced a new interface called Horizon, and that is basically a new interface that combines both the content editor and the experience editor. and it's entirely rebuilt. So it's really leveraging all of the new new JavaScript frameworks. I believe it's using Angular, and it also has supports, of course, all of the new features from Sitecore. So Horizon is still not being installed out of the box. So it's really an add-on that you need to install on top of it. But it is part of Sitecore. It is part of the same license as well. So it is available for everyone to use. But we are still working on making that on adding more features to Horizon, and to make it really something that can eventually replace, or at least it will coexist next to the experience editor for a long time. But hopefully we can. So with this release, we are also adding more features in terms of multi-site support, multilingual support, and also editing fields, which you do currently in the content editor. And also, of course, we made some performance optimizations, mostly on personalization. So and with for a while, we now have two basically versions of Sitecore. We have Experience Management and Experience Platform, where Experience Platform is the contains all of the features, including analytics, tracking, personalization, experience profile, etc. And XConnect, of course. But experience management in itself is only the core has CMS functionality of Sitecore. So within that, you can now also use personalization within the context of a session. So that was previously already possible if you used XP, but then in CMS only mode. But basically, experience management is a shrinked installation, basically, which excludes all of the analytics components that are within XP. So it is slightly more lightweight in the installation of experience management, and therefore more performant. And has also for some time personalization session only personalization was missing in there, but that's now included as part of XM as well. And of course Horizon, so that it's that is something you can install on top of Sitecore. Either XM or XP, Experience Management or Experience Platform. Both is possible, and that is most of the foundational features that any content authours requires is already part of Horizon. So it's definitely something that could benefit users. And also, maybe it's a small change, but it is for a lot of businesses that are using Sitecore. It's an important part. Has some the compliance to the data privacy laws. So GDPR has some local laws like PDPA in Singapore. So those are important parts of Sitecore as well, and we made some adjustments to those functionality to allow for compliance to those data privacy laws. So yeah.
Sorry, Tom. Do you want to minimize? We've got a little Teams window covering a bit of the slide.
Oh yes, that's a good point. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
So with Sitecore 10, we made sure that it's up to date with the privacy data privacy laws as well. So that is mostly the features for the business. Let's look at a little bit at the exciting new features for developers. So of course we just saw we had the support for containers. That is an exciting addition to Sitecore 10. But what we also introduced is we introduced a new ASP.NET Core SDK. So we allow for Sitecore implementations to be built on ASP.NET Core. So that is it's a big step, and that also allows for the latest to use the latest technologies as well. And in addition, we also have a command line interface, which I will also be looking into, and Sitecore for Visual Studio. So with containers, I won't go too deep into that, but especially if you use Docker, for example, that for developers that can be a very powerful addition. Because it helps you to quickly spin up a development environment, for example, and especially if you're working on multiple Sitecore implementations or multiple Sitecore instances, and you need to switch between them. Then you can use Docker to quickly set up a Sitecore development environment from scratch. And of course, you can use it all the way until production with Docker. So you can use ASP.NET Core. So what we introduced a new SDK for our headless services. So Sitecore has already introduced it a while ago with JSS, has something we call Sitecore headless services, and basically that allows you to do the rendering of your presentation outside the content delivery, right? So if we look at a traditional Sitecore MVC implementation, we have everything that we put into the content delivery server, and that is so your content delivery is responsible for all the data, for all your business logic, all of your and you of course you also deploy all your controllers and your views to there, right? And that's something now we allow you to decouple that. So we earlier did it already with JSS. So your JavaScript application is responsible for constructing the markup, the components, and the presentation of your pages. And that was something that JSS allowed you to do that outside of the content delivery. So there is something for JSS. We specifically call that a server-side rendering proxy, and that's something that basically renders your presentation outside of the content delivery. And that's something now we also support. Instead of JSS, we also, next to that, we also support ASP.NET Core. So ASP.NET Core, for that, you can basically use it in the same way as you would otherwise with JSS, but then with .NET Core. And so that's something that that you can do now in Sitecore 10. So if we look at how a Sitecore XP developer setup would look like, we have so this is in this case it's using Docker. So we have content management, identity server, and content delivery, and of course your Solar, Redis, databases, etc. And then between the visitor, this is for a developer setup in this case. So you're the developer, if you want to view your website, you do that. Oh, sorry. You do that instead of going directly to the content delivery, you go to the rendering host. So the rendering host is basically a new server role that is introduced that sits between your visitor and the content delivery. And the rendering host will then return the fully constructed HTML. So if the rendering host is serving our pages to the visitor, what is the content delivery doing then? So if we look at how basically the request flow will be for a visitor, we have a visitor, they go to your website, and they go to the rendering host. So the rendering host is building your presentation and returns the HTML. So that basically does the rendering of your components, your layout, etc. And then above there we have the CD environment, so your content delivery. All right. So on the content delivery, there's something called the headless services. So the headless services contains a layout service, and the layout service is basically a API that that returns a JSON representation of your data, of your content, of your of your presentation that you constructed within Sitecore. And that layout service, that JSON document, is then returned to the rendering host, and the rendering host will eventually use that to construct all the components and the layout and the presentation. The rendering host itself is a .NET Core app that uses the Sitecore rendering engine SDK. And that is basically responsible for responsible for the communication between the content delivery and the rendering host. So how does it work? So this is this is an existing diagram from JSS, but this could also be a .NET Core app. So within Sitecore, you build your presentation details, basically, right? So you have a layout assigned to your page. You have your components, your renderings assigned to the presentation details. And on top of that, you maybe have personalization rules that can change certain components, data sources, etc. So that is something that the rendering engine handles. So the rendering engine will give an entire breakdown of how the page should be rendered. So what components, what data sources are displayed on that page. And the layout service is then putting that into a JSON layout. So the layout service will return a JSON document to the .NET Core app, to the rendering engine SDK. And that way your rendering engine application, your .NET Core app, then knows what components it should show and how it should construct the page. All right, so I will show this later as well in Visual Studio, but a rendering, and a .NET Core app for your rendering host would look something like this. Just with your controllers, your models, your views, and so that project that would so if you have things like business logic, or you have things like integrations with other with other systems, for example, or you have queries or content search queries, etc. Those kind of things shouldn't really belong in the .NET Core app, but this should only be really for your presentation. For your presentation, you can still, besides that, you can still deploy to your content delivery and execute your business logic and all of the complicated things you normally do within .NET itself. And then you can use the layout service to basically set up the communication between the rendering host and content delivery. So basically, in your .NET Core app, you you set up the configuration of your rendering host app within the startup CS in the configure method, and there you specify what components you have and what kind of how it should set up the communication between the layout service and the rendering engine app. So you can get the rendering engine SDK via NuGet. So you can set up a .NET Core project and then install the NuGet package for that. So does that mean that we can build everything within .NET Core? Not yet. So if you've really something, if if you have business logic and any queries, and if you still need to make customizations within Sitecore itself, then you would still do that in your content delivery, and you can use you can customize the layout service to make sure that your data that you generate or that you gather on the content delivery, and then pass that to the rendering engine. All right, so let's look at what we can. How does that look like in a Sitecore 10 installation? So this is Sitecore 10, and yeah, it still looks the same. But I installed on this environment. I installed the basic company project. So the basic company project is actually available on GitHub. So if you go to github.com/Sitecore, you will find a Helix examples repository, and within that Helix examples, there's an ASP.NET Core example project, and that is what I use to set up this environment. So the website itself looks like this. And as you can see, I go to a host name called SUG, rendering host.dev.local. And that is different from my content delivery or my content management. And I install an XP single topology here locally. And here you can see that I have a different host name there. And that's because in my IIS, they are different websites. So over here, I have SUG-SC, the dev.local, that's my Sitecore instance. And then SUG rendering host, that is my rendering host application. So if I go into that directory, so this is my web root for the rendering host. So as you can see, this is pretty much the same kind of folder structure and file structure as, for example, identity servers. And so this is a .NET Core app, right? And if I then go to Visual Studio, then you will find this is the Helix example basic company project. And here I have two projects. So in my project layer, I have basic company, and then I have two Visual Studio projects, right? And the same for some other feature layer modules here as well. So for example, basic content. There I have only one, but for example, for navigation, I have two projects again, and that's because one of them will be deployed to our content delivery server, right? So the dot rendering that would so the dot rendering, that will be the one that will be deployed to my rendering host, and the dot platform in this case is the one that will be deployed to our content delivery server. So so within my my navigation layer module, I also have a folder layout service. And in this case, I had in this project, they made some customizations for the navigation. So that was typically something that more belonged on the Sitecore side, because I'm not sure what they exactly did, but they maybe had some kind of business logic that they needed to do on the side of the content delivery server. So what they did is they built something called a layout service content resolver. So the layout service content resolver is basically doing the data that it needs to get in order to have what needs to be used within the rendering engine. So in this case, they created a model, and then they returned that into the to the layout surface. All right, so this is a content resolver. So how does this how does the rendering engine get the content, and how does it know what kind of presentation it needs to load? And that is something that in this case, if I go to the oh, sorry, that's my session timeout. Of course, admin B. All right, so if I go to my home item and, for example, preview the presentation details there. Then you will see, in this case, it's a quite a has. Oh yeah, it's a little bit more advanced than the final layout, but they have a default layout. They have a header, a footer, and some promo card components. All right, so these are basically something called JSON renderings. So they are not a controller rendering, they are not a view rendering, but they are JSON renderings. So with that, Sitecore is then able to present that through the layout surface. So the layout surface is basically this URL. So it depends on if you have multiple layout surfaces or change the configuration. But in this case, it's just a default JSS configuration for the layout surface. So you use something called an API key. An API key is an item that you can create in the master database and then need to publish. I forgot that multiple times. But that's basically the ID of an API key item. The item URL. So in this case, it's the home item, because over here we also have the site name. And based on that, based on the site name, it knows what the home item from that site is. And that's something that the rendering engine SDK will pass for you. So your .NET Core app will call to this service and basically request the layout service, the layout service JSON for this URL based on your request URL on your rendering engine. So this is what the layout service will return. So this is basically this is containing some session data, the context, or based on the configuration, it will show, for example, what site it is, what language, etc. And it will show the root. So the root is the context item, basically, that is mapped from the item parameter. And it will show the fields on that context item. And if we go a little bit down, then we can see placeholders. And placeholders, that is actually where our presentation starts. So placeholders, this will be built based on the presentation details of your context item, basically. So within each placeholder key, it will then show what are the components within that placeholder that should be displayed. And within that, you can also get your, in this case, we don't have a data source here. If we go a little bit lower to a promo card component, for example. Yeah, so for example, here we have a promo card. And this has a data source here. And within that, we will also get the data source itself. So that way we can get from the data source, we can get what is the content on that data source item. And because of that, because we are still using the data source item there, it knows exactly. It is also supporting personalization with that. So because what personalization will do in Sitecore, it will switch around the data source based on the rules that are configured for personalization. And because we are using the data source there, we also support personalization. All right, so that is and the content, the layout service content resolvers that I showed earlier. That is a class that you can build, and there's a sort of pipeline that you can build, and that way with a layout service content resolver, you can basically change what the output of the components in the layout service is, basically. So that way you can pass data between the content delivery and the rendering engine. All right, so let's look at a rendering host, .NET Core app, basically. So if I go, for example, to this is my my project layer rendering engine .NET Core app. So within here, I have some views. So I of course have my layout. So that I believe this is the layout, if I'm correct. Yeah, so correct. So this is the layout. Here you can see placeholder header. main and footer. And then the actual components we have within here. So for example, if I go to basic content, here I have my views. And for example, here I have a promo card, a very simple component. And because we are using the rendering engine SDK, Sitecore will already map the data source into the component, basically. And that way we can use the Sitecore, Sitecore fields basically here, the field tags, to display the content and display the inline editable fields that we can still edit within the experience editor. So this way, this is basically instead of the @html.sitecore.field method that we used before in Sitecore PC, and this is the new syntax for that. And then finally, we in your .NET Core app, basically, you need to set up the startup.cs class, basically, and then in the configure method, you will have you will basically configure your .NET Core app with the layout service connection. So there's you need to set up what is the host name to the layout service, what is the API key, and you also need to specify the components that you have. So for example, in my over here I have extensions and then rendering engine options extensions, this one. And here's basically the component that I have, the rendering. And if I want to bind a model to that rendering, I can also do so in here. So that way it will automatically map the data source fields to that model as well. All right, and the last thing I want to show is that we also have a new Sitecore CLI, and the new command line interface for Sitecore also allows you to serialize content from Sitecore, to serialize your templates, your renderings, items within Sitecore, and to synchronize that with other developers as well, and also to other environments. So this is basically combining IDs from Unicorn and from Sitecore TDS into one tool, and this is coming out of the box with Sitecore. So basically you can use the command line interface by using so you can do .NET.Sitecore, and you can do login, and then you basically need to authenticate the command line, and you basically need to open a session with Sitecore to allow for the command line interface to communicate within your command prompt. So I already did that. I'm not sure if the session is still there, but what you then basically can do is you can do share push. And that way you can basically push your local serialized items to Sitecore. And you also have Sitecore pull, Sitecore share pull. And that way you can get changes that you made within Sitecore. And you can serialize that on your file system, right? And then you would do that before you commit, and then push to your version control system, and that way you can basically serialize and synchronize items between Sitecore environments. So this was something that you would before you always needed to set it up on using Unicorn or TDS, but now this is coming out of the box. The only thing for the CLI is that you need to install. You need to install a package from dev.sitecore.net called the Sitecore management services, if I'm correct, and that's a package that you need to install within Sitecore. And from that, once you have that installed, you can then use the command line interface. And within your app, you would then have a JSON file over here, and there you can basically specify what are the paths that you want to serialize. So you can include or exclude paths, and that way it will use that to serialize item. And you can also use the command line interface to publish items as well. And you can also use it to use a command called watch. And if you just use this and just let it run, then it will automatically serialize and push and pull items. So it will automatically monitor for that. All right. So that is what I wanted to show. Let me see if I can leave my. Okay, I don't think it's. I'm gonna stop presenting for a second, and then because I can't leave my my desktop apparently. All right, and. All right, so some final thoughts. So yeah, so serialization comes now out of the box. So something you can use for that, and so you can use the Sitecore CLI for that. And another way is we have Sitecore for Visual Studio, and that is basically a tool that you can set up, and then you basically have the same kind of interface that you may already be familiar with for TDS. So that way you can do this instead of the CLI. You can also do this from the Visual Studio interface. And do note that is a licensed product edition. So that's basically included within the TDS license that you may already have. So some final things. We have performance optimizations for XDB, for XConnect, and something if you are running on an application insights, we also have a application map. So that allows you for at least to better monitor your application itself. So that you want to monitor your application a little bit deeper on a deeper level. And finally, if you want to, we have two options. If you want to kickstart your project using a sort of accelerator that with a project that already contains a Docker integration, already contains a rendering engine app already, then you can use the Get Started template. We have actually a very easy walkthrough that is very easy to follow, and that way you can basically set up a blank project using all of these features already pre-configured basically. And do note that this is not built using the Helix principles, so you will still need to do that yourself on top of that. So, but the Get Started template is at least so at least already something that you can use, and then you already have if you want to do a customer implementation and you want to kickstart your project, you can use the Get Started template. And as a reference for Sitecore 10 Helix principles, you can use the Helix examples. And that is not really a project that you should use to kickstart your project. For that is the Get Started template. But at least Helix examples is a great reference for to know what how you should design your and architecture your Sitecore implementation on version 10. All right, so that was it. Are there any questions? All right, then I will leave it here and give it to Gurlin.
Cool. Thanks, Thom. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, I'm the last speaker of the day. I hope everybody can hear me fine and see my slides.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to just turn off my camera. Cool. So I'm going to be speaking to you about the new enhancements and the improvements that we have in XC10, which was just recently released post XP10 version, and how it gels and integrates with the Content Hub, the newer release of Content Hub. I don't think we have time to go into the full updates on Content Hub, but we can do that post this session, or we can take up another session for the details on updates on Content Hub itself. So I'm going to be concentrating more on XC and what are the newer features that link it with Content Hub. Okay, a bit of introduction about myself. My name is Gurlin. I'm the lead solution architect for Sitecore Professional Services based out of Singapore. I've been with Sitecore for a little over 3 years, almost touching 4 years now. And I work in XP, XC, managed cloud offerings, and Content Hub as well. So what I would like to start off with, not just a cheeky sales slide, because I totally resonate with this message that today's customers are really empowered, and brands are taking note of that as well, especially in this extreme COVID circumstances where everything is being driven digitally and through online interactions. Brands are taking more and more efforts to increase their presence and are being very careful about what customers think of them and how are they being perceived in the market as well. And taking from a very classic example that I can share with you is your shopping experience online with Amazon. Like if you go on Amazon right now, and if you're not buying with one of those big brand sellers which have shops, white labeled shops on Amazon, you're going with a small seller which doesn't even have a shop. He's just struggling and trying to figure out the ways on how to get his stuff onto the marketplace. With those kind of sellers, you would not be comfortable buying directly. Like I would not be comfortable just pressing my order. I would always go to the bottom of the page and look at the reviews. And from those reviews, I basically get a sense of what the seller is, how is he behaving, what is he selling, and what is his interaction and his experience with the other customers alike. And then only I might take my chance and go ahead and place an order with that particular seller. If my reviews are bad, be it my price is the lowest on Amazon, I will still be very doubtful in placing my order with that guy. And the similar situation actually can be applied to other shops as well who are running standalone stores. If they have the review section available on the site, you will always go and first have a look at the review of that particular product before you buy or place your order with that particular shop or seller. So in today's terms, this statement is really, really important. Like today's customers are really empowered, and then they have the power to drive the conversation with the seller and change how the sellers are behaving in the marketplace. And we believe in Sitecore that digital commerce's role is to extend the overall digital experiences, nurturing your customers towards a transaction, whether it be online or an offline transaction, because nowadays, most of the stores are racing to go online in these extreme circumstances that I mentioned before as well. Stores are closing down, the rents are not manageable with the lesser footfall in the malls and in the shops. Everybody wants to have an online presence. So we are here to drive that conversation and that experience, be it online or offline. And a classic example in the today's market has been with the separation between the content and the commerce. They are unfortunately separate systems altogether. One system is responsible for developing attraction, social media marketing, and your marketing platform. And the other system is basically your transactional system where you go and value your ROI based on the number of orders that have been received on that particular system. Once a transaction happens, that may be at the end of the commerce engagement, or you can even change it into a beginning of another marketing automation or a re-advertising engagement. So with these several systems that are not connected in the today's state, this means that the experience that customer has is kind of a lost or a disconnected experience. And the truth is that the commerce or a transaction is at a very middle of the experience. To succeed and provide experience, we need to prioritize the customer experience in every connected phase. Like we cannot have our marketing and the fancy looking ads and stuff on a content side, and then have a disconnected flow on how the customer basically engages and drives the transactions on that site. And to overcome that problem, the solution that Sitecore came out with, the whole end-to-end content story, where we have three systems which are totally connected now. Sitecore Content Hub being the base for driving the content that the marketers need to put them in front of their competitors, which is then served up through the experience platform, which then drives conversations and conversions through the Sitecore Experience Commerce, which measures, again, back the effectiveness in the XP in terms of analytics and the retargeting. And then you, again, drive back that information into the Content Hub and then rechannelize that information to drive better conversions out of the system. And all that has been made possible with the XC architecture, which is a lightweight microservices architecture based on REST APIs. It's a fully scalable architecture wherein you have separate systems for delivery, for management, and for authoring experiences. Your content delivery servers, the Sitecore content delivery servers, interact with the shop service. It's a role, ASP.NET Core role in the XC ecosystem, which is responsible for driving those conversations with your card, add to cart, checkout flows, payments, orders, and the interactions. The content management system interacts with another .NET Core role, which is responsible for the authoring experience, wherein when the merchandisers and the authors are going into the platform and doing the editing and catalog management. And to top it off, we have the commerce business tools, which every merchandiser uses to take care of their products, pricing, promotions, and the inventory. So all these systems altogether take care of that whole end-to-end journey that I just showed in the previous slides. Now, to drive this digital transformation with Sitecore 10 coming into the picture, we have divided our new feature sets into two buckets. One which help you drive the revenue of the site, and the second bucket is basically on increasing the efficiency and the agility of the backend operations, be it your deployment cycles, being your development effort on reducing your time to market, and even helping your developers with add-on or additional out-of-the-box features so that they don't have to build some things from scratch always. So to derive higher conversions and more sales, the biggest feature release in XC10 is your advanced bundling, product bundling feature, which is the dynamic bundling. We had static bundling in 9.x release itself, but there was a very big ask from the market that they need dynamic bundling, and we have supplied that with this new release. There are a bunch of new promotion enhancements. I will go into those details in the subsequent slides. Now you can have product recommendations based on past purchases, which would help you show better recommendations to your customers based on their previous purchase history. And you can drive more or increase the average cart value for those interactions as well. Boost and Bury with Solar Search is a new enhancement for merchandisers in the Sitecore business tools, where you can boost your product using the Solar Boost capabilities. To top it off, we have added in a bunch of new marketing automation campaigns, and one of them is the automated birthday campaigns, which was one of a very good ask from the market as well, wherein you can target back your customers with promo codes, giving them offs in their birthday months or their birthdays as well. For dynamic bundling, it's basically based on your sellable item entity itself, with an option to have an optional item as well as an upgradable item inside your bundle, and it is packaged and shown up as a sellable item. Down below on the left-hand side, I've basically tried to represent what it looks like. You can have a base item which has multiple variants, or you can have a base item with no variants itself, wherein the sellable item itself sells itself. On top of that, you can add in your optional items like a screen protector or a headphone if you're selling mobile phones with multiple GB versions as its variants. In terms of the pricing, it can calculate the pricing automatically, as in when you alter the content of the cart and the quantity that the bundle has, or you can also override the automatic pricing to be the manual set price for the entire bundle. Like if you want to buy a phone with the additional options of a screensaver and a headphones, you do not want to give them that it's going to be the same price, X plus X plus X. So it can be overwritten such a way that if you buy a bundle, it increases your average cart value, whereas it gives a percentage discount also to the customers. It supports sellable items with variants as well. So you don't have to do any customizations if your sellable items have variants. That's one of the most classical setup that we have in XC right now. And the inventory management is automatic. So you do not have to take care of individual bundle inventories because it still drills down to the sellable item inventory itself. And the XC engine in the backend will still keep on tracking those individual items inventory. We do also have a few samples in the SXA storefront on how the bundles are going to be rendered using the Skiban templates. And the newer SXA storefront has those renderings in there, and the dynamic bundles looks something like this, wherein you have your base item in there, and then you have your optional items at the bottom. You can alter the min and max of your optional items on how much they can add in a bundle. And based on that, the prices can be calculated either automatically or can be derived manually from the set price of the bundle. I'm just going to pause here for 2 seconds. Any questions so far? Nothing? Good. Okay. Moving on to the enhancements that we have in the pricing and promotions engine. So we have added in newer engine rules which support free gift with purchase. So it's going to be one single call. If a product has or qualifies for a free gift, it will be automatically added to the cart value, and later on the price will be actually waived off from the overall cart calculation. It also gives an option whether the end customer really wants the price or the gift or not. They can remove it as well. Promotion priority has also been added. Previously, there was a bit of ambiguity on how the promotions are getting evaluated. So we have added in a feature where you can set the priority of the promotions in which the order in which they will be applied to the cart or the line items. We have also added boosting rules to promote your products on search. And also one of the biggest asks that we have added in the current release is returning the available promotions with the discounted price as an API out of the engine. So this is one of those classical examples that you see on most marketplaces nowadays, that they let you know upfront itself that if you're going to add so much extra value to your cart, or if you're going to bundle these two products, you're going to get X amount of discount, or there's a promotion which would enable you to have that promotion after you do that X qualification. So with the current release, you can also have that feature. You can show what are the available promotions and the discounted price if the customer chooses to apply for that promotion or wants to go for that promotion. So all this will help drive the ROI out of the system, enable more customers, and increase the average cart value as well. Moving on to the next bucket of our enhancements, and one of those biggest one is actually our adoption for Dockers and Kubernetes. I won't go into much details on this one, but you have already seen it with Rob's session, that how smoothly and how efficiently Sitecore environments can be spinned up and teared down in a scripted manner. And this is a really big achievement for Sitecore, because this also enables our movement towards the newer stack of running on containers. So XC comes applied with the new images and all the demo stuff that actually Rob showed you for XP or XM. That also applies for XC versions as well. Another big improvement that I want to share with you on this release is one of our integrations with Content Hub. And why I presented this slide again is, although we had the whole content end-to-end story in place, but there was still a small disconnect between the two red blocks that I've highlighted in this picture. So in our Sitecore Content Hub, we do have a module called PCM, Product Content Management. And that's basically a sort of a PIM system inside Content Hub. We won't call it a PIM system because it's not a full PIM, but it has the similar capabilities in there. And we also have our catalog or merchandising system in our XC. Now, with this two separate systems, pre-10 release, there was no integration or a connector between these two systems. So if you're going to enable a customer to use the PCM in Content Hub, and there are also customers on the XC side, they might have to maintain the product information in two separate places. Now with the XC10 release, we have come out with a sample SDK integration, which enables you to have a connection between Sitecore DAM and XC. It's a connection between the XC sellable items and the product information inside Content Hub. It moves the DAM assets as well as the other product properties such as relations and taxonomies from Content Hub into Sitecore, and it is a fully configurable system inside the Sitecore XC policy. So the mappings between what entity and what property of Content Hub goes into what field in Sitecore Commerce is fully configurable in a policy. And it supports the XC Composer templates. So tomorrow, if you want to have new properties to relate back the information that was being captured in Content Hub, you can quickly just spin up, go to your BizFX, spin up a new Composer template, and then attach it to the sellable item, update the policy config file, and the information will be flowed into your Sitecore XC system. And the flow is seamless to your XP storefronts as well, like the updated assets and the information, the DAM information, as well as the extra property information is readily available to be consumed on the storefronts. The DAM integration architecture looks something like this. So on the Content Hub side, we have a feature called triggers and actions. So what happens is whenever an entity gets updated on the Content Hub, it triggers a process which then executes an action. And what that action does is basically puts in that entity ID onto the Azure Service Bus. And then on the Sitecore Commerce side, we have message handlers, which are continuously listening to the Azure Service Bus and what is being put on the Azure Service Bus. Once it gets hold of that entity ID, we use the Web SDK to call the entity information, the extra property relations, DAM assets, the public URLs of those particular images, all that stuff. We pull it out through the Web SDK, and the XC sellable item is updated and stored back. And post that, the minions take over, they index the information, and it's available on the storefront as well. So this is the whole flow. Right now, the connector only takes care of one-way flow, like the information flows only from Content Hub to XC, like whatever information is updated in XC will not flow back into Content Hub. And the primary reason for that is if you're going to be using Content Hub for enriching your products, you would want to do it at one place. You will not want to do it one time in Content Hub and some information in XC. So you'll have to make a choice where is your primary information sitting. Moving on to the next set of enhancements on the front end side. So we have enhanced or have added in new capabilities templates onto the Skiban templating structure. So for your front end development, you'll still be relying heavily on your HTML and your CSS, but you have a lot of options on how do you want to make use or how do you want to render your stuff out on the SXS storefront. You can use JavaScript, you can use Knockout, you can use Skiban for rendering, or you can use the old-fashioned Razor rendering for HTMLs. But the backend pretty much remains the standard. We're using Sitecore MVC for all our backend development. Different combinations are possible in the storefront renderings. You can use Skiban to render your front-end components. Like a classic example, which is available on the Sitecore doc side, is your order lines. You can use Skiban with Knockout if you want to do data binding for those particular components. Another classic example available on the Sitecore doc side with the code of those Skiban templates is your product bundles. Razor only, it's a classic Sitecore setup. I don't need to go into details of that. And then you can use Razor with Knockout. An example is the product inventory that is available on the Sitecore doc site. Now, with all these enhancements coming to the picture, we do not want to forget our Helix principles. Those are still the base for developing anything and everything on the Sitecore platform, including XC. So if you have not gone into and refreshed your knowledge on Helix, I would encourage you to go and have a look again at the Helix documentation. It has been recently updated, and it now has guidelines or sets forth principles and practices on how to manage and maintain your XC solutions as well on top of your XP. So previously, people used to be very confused whether if you're building a solution for XP and XC comes into the picture, where do you put the code in one solution? You spin up a separate solution. So we do have guidelines and principles and practices on how you can manage and maintain all your solutions, be it XP or XC or your rendering host, the one that Thom just showed you, on how that can be efficiently managed, keeping in line and keeping track of all the Helix principles and guidelines. So that's the end of my session. I'll just pause here for any questions you guys might have. No questions? Cool.
All right. I think that also thank you, Gurlin, for this. That would also conclude our meetup for today. Thank you so much for Rob, Gurlin, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for attending. And hopefully we can either have another virtual meetup like this later, or preferably a in-person meetup when the situation improves. But for today, I want to thank you, and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, Thom.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rob. Thank you guys for joining.
Yeah.
Thank you.